Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the lectures that became a tradition with Dr. Cohen every Wednesday night. We moved from Mondays to Wednesdays, which we thought was going to be a better date for many of you. So, welcome to tonight's lecture from Menlo Park, California. A lot of you are watching locally and globally, and hopefully from all over the world. And today we had a very interesting day in California. Uh, Red and sort of dark, gloomy skies from
Orange.
orange, a little bit of a apocalyptic view and mood in this area. But we all are healthy, and the air quality hasn't been that bad actually because the smoke is hanging quite high, not affecting that much us. But I hope everybody's staying safe and sound and healthy in these days. As you know, we are open, or Dr. Cohen is open to see his patients. And I remember pretty much now every year during the fire season, we have the influx of patients who have sensitive you know uh, lungs or bronchitis or some have asthma or some other conditions that get affected by that. They come and they get great relief from Dr. Cohen's protocols, and maybe a few things that Dr. Cohen can mention to all of us that we can do at home or we can purchase from us just to make you feel a little bit better. Tonight, Dr. Cohen will ponder upon a very interesting question. Is it beginning of the or the end of times? And given the world events, a lot of us are wondering in our heads and thinking about what is going on, why these things are happening. But it's always interesting to hear a different perspective, a more higher view and more spiritual view and more experienced and wise view that Dr. Cohen will be able to offer you tonight. So I hope you're going to enjoy all of that, and we will end with meditation as usual. And if you have any questions, please type in the chat, and I'll be moderating the chat and answering any questions as you guys have along the way. So enjoy the evening. Hopefully everybody is comfortable with a cup of tea or just after their dinner, or you can have dinner with us, whatever works for you, or you just came back from a busy day and want to relax and just listen. That's also an option. We welcome you all and have a great lecture. All right, Dr.
Okay. So I obviously picked out a topic that's not actually, it's an ancient topic called the end of times. And the last thing I want is anybody to panic that these are the end of times, because that's not even how it's written in the spiritual text. In the spiritual text, it's written Acharita Yamim, which means the end of days. And the meaning behind that is the end of life as we know it. And then what does it mean as we know it? As you look around the world and what's going on now, as we knew it, has put us in a great deal of trouble. We've disrespected the earth we live on, and we disrespected our own bodies, and we disrespected our relationships, not with only with other human beings, but we disrespected our relationship with other sentient beings. And as you know, and you heard me talk about it, human beings are not the only sentient beings on this planet. In some key spiritual ways, there are species on this planet that are more sentient than human, and that we need to respect each other and interact with each other. Some of the species, one that particularly I learned from is the elephants, but it's also the gorillas. It's also the sentient, is we all know, is the dolphins. That I've learned from a doctor that actually used dolphin energy, that he learned to interact and communicate, treating terminal cancers. So what does that lead to? That means that each one of us, not just human beings, but each one of us that are looking to evolve and get past this crisis and get back to the true meaning of who we are, which is people that, or beings that are capable of answering questions that need to be asked, and answering them in a way that becomes applicable to everyone that needs help. So, end of days, and it certainly looked like today here in California, like the end of days. The When I woke up, I wasn't sure it was morning or it was still night. It was absolutely black, and it was turned out it was um, 8:30 in the morning, and the air was literally orange from all the particulate matter. And what it means is that we are burning up a lot of the substance that feeds our life here on this planet. And as you know, that California is capable of being very conscious and has a lot to offer. And let's go into it. So what's the key thing? We have a pandemic. We have a dangerous virus, and we've known it for some time. It's dangerous, and it's dangerous. I'm going to repeat it, and a lot of you can tell me to shut up. You've heard this so many times, but when our immune system operates by protecting us from adversaries that we're not familiar with, that are not native to who we are. And if our immune system gets activated, if it doesn't know exactly what it's protecting us from, it could evolve into what's called medically or physiologically as a cytokine storm, which is small particulates. And the danger of what's happening is that people are starting to panic. And those of you who know me, I'm not anti-vaccine, but I'm definitely against dangerous vaccines that we aren't carefully studied and very carefully monitored what adjuvants, what is added in to get an immune response. And for the vaccines to work, we have to produce antibodies, and the antibodies have to be particular to the pathogen. And what they're doing now, is they're not taking the time to make sure it's safe. And whether it's for political reasons or financial reasons or any other kind of reasons that people come up with, that's not a wise thing to do. Because if we get it wrong, it's capable of wiping out a large number of mammals on this planet by unleashing more particulate matter, more proteins that our immune system is not familiar with. So as I've been advocating since the pandemic, we have to educate our immune system. And how do we educate our immune system? We know from science what educates the immune system. It learns from exposure. So all of us, what we're exposed to, if we handle it right, we learn and get more adept at living with pathogens, the more familiar we get and the more we get exposed. And if we don't get exposed, which happened with COVID-19, that came from an area in the world where no humans had been before. So the other mammals that lived in those areas had been exposed to these type of viruses, those particular uh, proteins and those particular uh, growth factors. They've learned to adapt with it. And then suddenly in the last century, humans started migrating into areas where absolutely never has there been a human before. So we were never exposed. And this was actually written about by actually a friend of mine who wrote the book about it. And he went with scientists in these areas. And I asked them to bottom line what they were discovering. That was actually, I think, in 1994. And he told me, I said, your book is about 900 pages. I'm a single father. I'm in postgraduate school. And I'm also have a full practice. So the chances of me reading that book, which wasn't a required test, is unlikely. So I need to give me the time and explain to me what you discovered. And he said pretty much what I told you, that the immune system, which I certainly didn't know at that time, has to get educated. And so that understanding, when we got exposed to COVID-19, that we know what happens if an immune cell, which is basically macrophages and mast cells, they'll overreact if they're exposed to something that they're not 100% sure what they're exposed to. And we know what we're exposed to, what's recorded in our innate and acquired immune system. So when you take vaccines, and again, I'm going to repeat so nobody gets me wrong, I'm not against vaccine. I'm against unsafe vaccines that are adjuvants, which are added. Particularly Zorbital is a very dangerous one to get a massive immune reaction of antibodies. Remember, most of our immune system comes from our gut. That's why gut health has always been known to be uh, important for maintaining health and creativity and longevity on this planet. And the gut um, is where 80%, some say 70%, other scientists say 90%, so I'll say 80% of our immune system exists. And then we get an antibody, an immunoglobulin response to what we're exposed to. Now, what happens when we're exposed to something and we don't know what we're exposed to? So I was teaching a class, and I think I came up with the idea that it's as if you're a policeman and you're on patrol in a downtown area, and you're hearing gunshots go off, and they're coming from a bank or a store that's being robbed, and you ignore the gunshots and you spend your time giving parking tickets. That's literally what happens. So what tells our immune system that something is a pathogen? What is a pathogen? Something foreign, something that doesn't belong to us. It's not part of our species. It's not part of it's other life forms. It's from microbiology. And if we're exposed to that, and it doesn't recognize it, it can generate into an attempt for survival. And if it goes into survival, then we start creating false narratives of protein reactions, and then we end up with what's called emergent viruses. And that's what we have now. They're called emergent viruses, that we're getting exposed to pathogens that there's no cellular memory. So there's no cellular memory. It's like you don't have Google, you don't have a library. You're relying on your memory that's faulty, because everything needs to get recorded. So if you're not getting recorded correctly, you're going to overreact or underreact based on the attempt to survive. So we came up with the idea, and I borrowed it from the Journal of Cellular Biology, which is one of the most prestigious journals in health and medical physiology. And they mapped out what were the steps, and there's many steps, but the main ones was that we're calcium dependent. And a lot of people are saying, well, I take calcium, and how come I always get sick, or how come I end up with uh, stones, or I end up with arthritis, which is basically calcium misused. All calcium is not the same. So the calcium that actually marks the pathogen is calcium bicarbonate. So the calcium bicarbonate we use, that's been found before my time even, coming from beets and beet roots. It's made into calcium. It breaks down, it only takes one enzyme, it breaks down into calcium bicarbonate. If you're just taking a supplement calcium, it would take probably 11 or 12 enzymes to make it to bicarbonate. I don't know anybody that has such perfect gut health that can do that, and it still stays in an active form. So that calcium bicarbonate is swallowed, we don't make it, and it goes into our bodies, into our guts. That's the GALT. That's also our immune system. Remember, the GALT is the part of the GI tract that operates also as an immune system. And then the most important thing is what was mislabeled as vitamin D, which is really more of a steroid hormone. And I just heard last night that the vitamin D is affected by sun activity. So every 10 or 11 years, you get more sunspots and more explosions in the sun, and that affects our need for vitamin D. And so vitamin D is a key component. Nobody understood until recently why every single immune cell has numerous vitamin D receptors. Now, I don't think our creator created this concept, which is basically evolution is the mind of God, of receptors, unless there's a reason. So if we have receptors on every cell, they're obviously necessary for us to place our being on this planet. And so vitamin D is the key, and that carries the calcium bicarbonate that's already in the gut from you digesting it, and that carries it into the blood. And then one of the things that people forgot about, and that'd be interesting in history to know why that was forgot about, it was the vitamin F, which is basically a derivative of fatty acids. And we know fatty acids, when they discovered vitamin F, nobody knew that the fatty acids is the food of our microbial biome that determines who we are and how we're alive and how we adapt to the world. So without that vitamin D that's carried to the tissues, the calcium bicarbonate will not notify the immune cells that we have a pathogen and that we can survive. So we underestimated how important vitamin D is. And also, we understand now that vitamin D is determined for what time of year we're exposed and what year we're exposed. And then there's the importance of nutrition. What is nutrition? We're designed to live on this planet with the nutrients to rebuild us every single day. They're the building blocks. So if you do phony food that doesn't come from this planet, comes from the mind of people that are mixing chemistry and playing along with taste receptors to get us addicted to products that are blowing ourselves up. In other words, we're creating way too many antibodies and more destruction. So we're dependent on having enough antibodies to protect us, but also to guide us back to who we are. So every day we're destroying ourselves not only for energy but for repair. And if the repair component comes from the food we eat. And it's no accident that a lot of the herbs we take have a purpose that's both medicinal, but it's also nutrition. So turmeric, which is a dramatic one, is both a food and it's a healer. It's a nutrient. Um, it's an herb that allows us to adapt to the world around us. And as we talked about, all plants develop skills over time of how to protect themselves from predators. Otherwise, it will get eaten and there'll be nothing left. And they contain that memory. And so when they're a skilled herbalist can take those plants and extract their immune system, which in a sense can be a poison, but at a very low dose, it becomes uh, a marker for adapting to the stresses of our life. So our lives now are very stressed. Unless you live in isolation and away from it, even there, the poisons from the climate change are spreading around. So we need not only the herbs so we can adapt to the particular poisons. And anytime you're taking in a biochemical poison, which is a pharmaceutical drug, you're you're weakening yourself. You're not repairing anything. So what's the most amazing to me that became within a century or a little over a century that the idea that most people are not getting the nutrition or the protective elements from nature, and they're trying to compensate by poisoning themselves. It doesn't make sense except in an emergency. You need nutrition, very precise, whole food nutrition grown on very rich soil, full of microbes that can be transferred inside us and take hold in our GI tract. And our energy system is based on the mitochondria, that part of the cell that makes the Krebs cell and produces the energy we need to live. And to fuel that, we need the food every single day, but whole food. And we also need skills. Now, I was thinking late this afternoon, what are the guides that, if we have a planet that's blowing itself up, or maybe we can turn it around, and there's always hope. I'm not a pessimist. I think that if we stay conscious and we meditate and we eat right and we stay on purpose, we're capable of things that are not even imaginable. And I think that if we have to produce things that before we had no idea that we were capable of. And I remember a story when I was by a teacher of mine when I was basically a kid. I was still a teenager. And he talked when he was a kid, and he was from Poland, and he talked about his teacher. And his teacher, when the Nazis invaded Poland, they were rounding people up, and if they weren't shooting them, they were sending them to death camps. And his teacher was such a deep spiritual meditator, and we have to be able to meditate at that same level when we're exposed to the dangers of his teacher. And he was taken in a car to cross the border from Poland to France, getting to France. And the Nazis stopped the car and they asked him for his papers. And he said he was in the car and he saw this, and he saw his teacher hand the Nazi officer a shopping list for the grocery store. And he handed the grocery list to the Nazi officer, who looked at it and read it and handed it to another officer, and they waved him forward. So the information we broadcast can overcome the most difficult obstacles. We have that capability. If we have a distinct purpose for being alive, and life itself is dependent on us reaching that purpose, we too can create a level of consciousness that can turn a grocery list into a passport. And that's what we're confronted with. We have to have that level of consciousness. We have to be super creative, and we have to start creating the links to higher consciousness and purpose, because it's getting difficult with all this pressure and also this level of stress. They're saying now that 41% of people are in some level of depression. So anybody in depression means they're not generating enough energy in order to handle the demands. So part of what we do is not only take the medicines, which I'm convinced that it's the medicines, and I have so much feedback on this now, will help us get through, but we also have to work on our consciousness. So we have to take time to meditate and focus on making sure, because the future will depend on how we calibrate our reality. And we think that the brain, most of us think that what we listen to in our brains is accurate. But neuroscience tells us it's not, that it's recreated, that our brain is constantly recreating information to make it coherent for us to cope with our stressors. And that if we're relying on accurate information from our brain and we don't have a higher consciousness, and we don't have the higher element of energy that we can self-generate, then we're playing a game without the tools that we need to be an active participant. And so the proper nutrition is understanding who we are. We are spiritual beings that came to this planet, that evolved in this planet to plant the seeds of life. And this planet is one of many in the multiverses, not just the universe, that's capable. So in a sense, we're farmers.
No, I have a question. Like you talked about the mother, like planet is going through some sort of transformation. What do you think is happening on a planetary level to Earth that is going through so many pretty sort of significant events, even in the our human history on this planet?
This is my opinion. I think that the planet has to learn how to survive us.
And is it their way, like cleansing and clearing and sort
It
of
can be,
shedding population?
but it's also information. We're in an information age. The planet has never been exposed to a species that behaves like our species behaves. We walk around like we were given the planet, we can do what we want with it. I think it's a misinterpretation of a religion. We were we're stewards, we're partners, we don't have dominion. And misreading, a lot of it is bad translations. Misreading the sacred text, people think this is all given to human beings,
Mm-hmm.
and that we have the freedom to enjoy it, which we do. We must enjoy it. That's part of the components of living, but we don't have the freedom to destroy everything around us, thinking, having the delusion that's our benefit. The idea that we can turn a rejuvenating reality into a selfish reality that's based on ownership and competition. I think competition was misunderstood. In homeopathy, we look at the different worlds. We look at, I actually wrote somebody in Pakistan last night, or 2 nights ago. They asked me about remedies that come from the plant world. Well, that's easy. The plant world is all about sensitivity and
Mm-hmm.
consciousness that comes from plants,
Mm-hmm.
and that includes herbs. What about minerals? Without proper minerals, you don't repair and you deteriorate. And what does that mean? It means proper relationships. So when somebody's having trouble with relationships, somebody tells me that they don't get along with people, they don't get along with their spouse or their children or something like that, they, they feel like they're in a foreign world. That's because they haven't built the structure. And those that know me, I spent 35 years learning about the deepest teachings of the tree of life, which explains the structure of creation, which also means that's also the structure of healing. And that was predates human beings on this planet.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next thing, what about remedies from the animal world? I mean, when do you take a remedy from the animal? That always has to do with survival and competition. And what does it mean to compete? We have finite amount of nutrients, and what's the best strategy to compete for those nutrients? What does a mother do if she's trying to feed her children and there's other predators around? I was watching great lesson. I think I posted it on Facebook of a herd uh, of wild dogs started surrounding elephants, looking to get the babies.
Mm-hmm.
And the elephant herd put the babies in the middle of the herd and created a circle around the babies, and none of uh, the wild dogs could penetrate that. And then they slowly went after the dogs till finally the dogs gave up and took off. It was perfect harmony, and those of you who know me know those are the skills of women, because the elephant tribes or herds are always matriarchal. And the matriarchal is what do we have to do together so everybody survives and we increase longevity. And that's critical, as every mother knows, that every single mother that's given birth to a baby knows that they've self-sacrificed their own well-being to create another, and how to use their own suffering as a way of bringing about opportunity of survival. And that one of the Tibetan teachings that I took many, many years ago with Ripo Rinpoche was that one of the places in the 7 point mind training was that everything in life at one point had been your mother. And that sounds ridiculous until you actually start working on it. It takes years and years and years to work on the mind training to understand, yes, every plant was once your mother. Everything that became bloomed in life had to self-sacrifice in order for something to be born and to live. And the consciousness to know how that's all interconnected. I think we talked about the many aspects of the soul, and that could also can comply. And one of the steps that I always remembered was that the the sense of love in the mind training is the love of a mother who sees her firstborn after birth for the first time. It's her firstborn. That's the kind of love we need to rejuvenate the planet and our place in the planet. And we have to do what we can to heal the planet so this experiment of producing a life of meaning and hope and self-sacrifice, and the idea that you don't poison something that's starving. We're all starving for that level of love and gratitude and trust and truth, so we can live our purpose. That which is what we all want. Our purpose is to answer a question of how life survives when it's under the pressure of lack of balance.
So all you're saying is because there is no balance, because the earth is trying to survive itself, in these conditions, and, sort of we having all this thing happening, which we kind of can say it's a wake up call.
It's a wake-up call, but I wouldn't go as far as blame it all on humans.
Mm.
I mean, humans are a big part of it, but a part of it is um, the whole process. The whole process, part of the process, is allowing something to die. When you have a retina in your eye, it doesn't become operational until the vast majority of the cells of the retina have died. So death is part of being reborn into something much more elegant and functional than it was originally.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where we get specialization. And so what's this level of consciousness where we can sit and meditate and be attracted to the foods that will repair our wounds? How can we go into nature and eat whole foods that can repair us instead of going to a doctor who drugs us up so we don't feel the pain that we have from what's broken in us, that we go through the healing process? And I think I mentioned the healing process comes from the tree of life, or the creation process reversed. That as we go through step by step, and building up our immune system so we can create our own identity, depends on going through the process and the first process of healing this earth and our communities and our families is one that's so simple, but it's so difficult. Is knowing that who we are, that's how you start to heal when you get this. Who you are has nothing to do with what's happened to you. So I'm not really Dr. Cohen. Whatever role you played, it's not who you are. The deep part of who you are on a soul level doesn't change. As we experience different levels of development, we learn in a new way who we are. And that comes from the origin of creation, which is a step-by-step process. Our bodies have changed over time. We don't have the same bodies that we had, human beings had 1,000 years ago. I heard a TED talk by a great scientist where he's talking about the paleo diet. And he said he's dumbfounded that people think a meat-based diet is the paleo diet. He said that has nothing to do with what people in paleo times were eating. It's very different. And I think I've talked to you about a master that I spent some time with back in the 70s, whose family served me chicken, and I was vegetarian vegan, and I told them I wouldn't eat the chicken. I told the story over and over again.
Yeah.
And that's the whole thing. That when you eat something, that something is self-sacrificed. So when you get exposed to a tree and you take the wood from the tree to build shelter for your children, and then you use that shelter of your children to bring them up so they can give to others in a very generous way, that's different than just smashing down forests or putting them on fire and expelling orangutans from their homes with no replenishment. So when you do, we all do destructive things, but our choice of actions can elevate the consequences of ours into a spiritual consciousness. Any other questions?
We have a very quiet audience today, and I did not see any questions from any of you. If you guys have any questions, please let us know. But I have one question. You you started the lecture with, is it the end or is it the beginning of time? And give us your view, about the future. Let's talk about 5 years from now or a year from now. Let's say when all this over, how do you see us living our lives?
Well, I don't know about it being over. I just read from a scientific, totally science, that there's a potential for the virus to live another 75 years. And so the choice is, if the virus is still active for generations, then we have to be very careful of the choices we make. I don't think it's the end of physical life, but it's how we use the physical life. Right now, and I'm as guilty as anybody else, we take certain things for granted, that somehow we earned them.
Mm-hmm. Like what?
Well, that we can have a full meal every day in our life, that we can move people out of where they live so we can have more space that we don't need. Um, that it's okay for people to go without, well, when we have too much. And I think that we're going to have a different level of consciousness because we're all interconnected. If one group suffers, we all suffer. There is no disconnect. And that one teacher that told me that um, said that you can't convince me that a person that allows somebody else's child to suffer, to get sick and hungry, truly loves his own children. Because we're all everybody's children.
Yeah.
And those are words, and those are difficult behaviors to change because there's using technology. We're not aware of everything we're doing.
If you think about it, and that used to haunt me for years,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of that dilemma. Why do we have? Why there are people who have so much, and yet there are so many people who have nothing. And I tried to solve that problem from my perspective, but that was too overwhelming because the need and the gap is so huge. So there was one person, as one person, you cannot solve the systemic problem. What do you think, collectively, what could we all do to move closer to that more balanced living?
Well, I remember you brought up about balance, and there was a great spiritual teacher, and he was asked that question.
Mm.
And he said, every good deed that you do is a reward. Every bad deed is payment. And he said, where would you like your reward and where would you like your payments to be? Here or where it counts? Because you can own this planet, own the corporations, and live in big mansions that make you miserable. There
Mm.
was a shaman who said, it's very simply, at a class I taught, he was a student, he was a real shaman, and he said that the more you have, the more time it takes to take care of it.
That is true.
And if you're so busy taking care of what's impermanent, what is permanent gets diminished and lost. And that moment that somebody you love looks you in the eye and knows that you've made their life richer, that's worth 1,000 Googles.
Yeah.
And that's not just words.
Yeah. I think what you said is I want to take away that from tonight's lecture, that finding the balance, how much time we take to take care of what is permanent and what is impermanent, kind of an indicator where we stand in balancing our life.
Yeah, if you remember in the lecture we talked about the 5 aspects of the soul.
Yeah.
4 of those are impermanent.
Yeah.
So if you want to get back to the permanent part, which resonates and broadcasts what stays forever,
Mm-hmm.
there's no limit of lifetimes. Um, then you have to feed the other 4 with your daily behaviors.
Yeah.
And we're all here for a purpose. We're all here to heal.
Yeah.
And there are medicines you can take to heal the wounds of the smoke.
Yeah.
We talked about them earlier, which in my mind is Empaflex.
You mentioned Empaflex, Pneumotrophin, Polmaco,
And dermatrophin.
and Dermatrophin. So if any of
That's
you
the
are
line.
curious, please reach out to our office. For the information. We'd be happy to sell you a package of supplements. And
Yeah.
yeah, we are here to heal. I hear you. And you know what is truly inspiring, like lectures like this, and every conversation we have here. I'm sitting here with you, listening to you. I feel like we are healing each other just by being each other's presence, listening to our wise people in the community who dedicated their lives to collect this wisdom and share this wisdom. And, I look at your work, life's work, Dr. Cohen, and I see how much dedication and commitment and compassion you have towards your work and your patients, and that gives me hope. We talk about this disbalanced life, disbalanced community, but again, I come across people like you every day who bring light, who bring hope, who bring positivity, who bring solutions to our problems, because we will always have problems as a humanity.
Yeah, but problems are opportunities.
And we need somebody who sees them as opportunities to heal and bring us some sort of a roadmap, a solution. How do I get out of that? So maybe with that we can go into meditation tonight, and walk us through, I don't know, the future times, or something, where we see hope, balance, and connect with that permanent self.
And remember that one of the great spiritual teachers from a few hundred years ago said that suffering is the fertilizer for the soul.
Yeah.
And that if we knew the whole story, we'd be dancing and celebrating.
Yeah.
And that what part of the soul has to grow, the permanent part of the soul doesn't grow. It's always been there, it always will stay there.
Yeah.
It's the soul, part of the soul that connects with other souls.
Yeah.
And that together it becomes something more potent and productive than if it wasn't connected. And that's one of the ways of expressing that is community.
Yeah.
And community is it's sharing the energy. Okay, since there's no questions, either I was boring or or I was
Very
clear.
clear. Yeah.
I hope you got something out of it. Okay, so I want us to begin to look at meditation in a very practical way, not only to build up our immune system and activate our immune system, but just like our GI tract is governed by how it connects, the mitochondria connects with the biome, which is the microbes. Um, that connection is also part of meditation. So we're growing, we're using fertilizer from everything we're learning and applying. And every time we avoid the fear and look at what we can create, we're literally using that as fertilizer to not only activate, but connect all the pathways through the heart, that we create a true home by going through all the connections, and that the paradigm that I use is the tree of life. So take a few moments and let's use our ability to see things for what they are. Use it as a way for us to know that life is not just the literal life, but the metaphor, the hope, but how we connect. We all have to learn how to connect in a very deep way through the heart. So we become potentized, and we learn what works through us, and we can share it with as many people or beings, not just people. I mean, there are a lot of beings on this planet that are suffering, even more so than human beings. So now I want you to visualize yourselves and watch yourself being covered with a stream of light. We call it pure light. It's the original flow that life descended through light. So life descended through light. That's why every cell of our body has light receptors, and converted that into using other life. And that the more connected it is, and the more it becomes, sentient and giving and protective. The same as a mother protects her children by not only producing oxytocin, but becoming connected with life so she can feed them and they can grow. And that's the power of the sacred feminine that governs consciousness. So now just experience the feminine love of self-sacrifice, that everything that exists in our consciousness only came about because some feminine force had to give up of itself to serve something else evolving. Sit quietly and just feel yourself being loved in a totally unselfish way, so you can manifest the energy necessary for you to allow creation to exist with the benefit of all elegant consciousness, and eventually create other universes that are conscious, that are not governed by self-interest and violence, but are governed by interconnectedness. Take a few moments, feel part of that self-sacrifice, feel part of how many parts of life gave of itself so you can exist. And sit peacefully and just receiving. And that receptivity converts into compassion. Compassion being the need to become more conscious and a vehicle for healing, so you can be an example to others. Just allow yourself to experience this. Feel the energy being projected on you. And it's a blessing that will stay with you through eternity. Take a few moments and I'll join you shortly. And now take a few moments and experience your own determination to not allow any other being distract you from being who you are and what you have to give. I will be myself and will not be distracted by anything transient. Take a few moments, repeat that to yourself at least 3 times. I will not be distracted from being who I am by anything impermanent and transient. Just visualize yourself that anything that I receive may evolve from an understanding that eventually, if I stay focused and determined, it will grow into bliss and with wisdom. And I'll learn to see everything the way it exists without the need of personally having to change it. Allow yourself to sit quietly and take it in. May you be peaceful and productive, and may you evolve dramatically this week. 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2. Take a deep breath. Open yourself up. Allow yourself to be loved and to love. And may you give and always receive what you need. Good night. See you next week.
Good night, everyone.